Hi, it's Rob, CEO of Giraffe. In this video, I'm going to build a zoning analytics app with the Giraffe Analytics tool. So two things I want to cover is first, creating the logic using the analytics tool, and secondly, how easy it is to share and scale that or distribute that logic once you've built it. Okay, so first things in Giraffe, project, everything's a project. So we create our project by drawing a boundary and then saving. I'll save this as zoning template so I can find it again, and I'll put it in the Giraffe team, save. Okay, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in the cadastral parcels. So this is the cadastre layer in New South Wales. We actually have a full continental US cadastre layer through Regrid, which is pretty epic. So no matter where you are in the world, we can generally find a cadastre layer. And so what I'm doing is I'm bringing a few parcels in, and then I'm just by eye scaling them. So not 100% accurate, but it'll play for the purposes of demonstration. Okay, so now before we use the analytics tool, what we need to do is set up some land use typology. So we ship with this generic land use, which has target FSRs or FARs, a maximum height, building coverage, hardscape, softscape, etc. So I'm going to create from that, I'm going to create a zoning typology I'm going to call R1, which is a low density residential typology. So the target FSR is probably 0.4, say, and make it a nice soft pale color because it's low density. And this looks about right. So I'm going to save, and then I'm going to, let me just shrink this screen ever so slightly. And from this, I'm going to create a high density residential typology, R3, and give it an FSR of 2 and a max height of 16, building coverage of 0.6, and I'll take that off softscape coverage, so it's at 0.15. That should have 0.6 plus that equals 1, and canopy cover I'll say 0.15 as well. I'm going to make that a bit more orange and save it. Okay, and the last thing I'll do is I'll actually add a height parameter to this. So the target height parameter that you see over here, max height, makes sense, but it doesn't make sense to Giraffe. Giraffe renders a height parameter, and so for the R1, I'll also duplicate that height parameter into that max height parameter into a height parameter, so Giraffe extrudes the geometry, because Giraffe is always looking for special keys, and if it finds them, it will do something with them. And in this instance, the special key is height. It extrudes it up. Okay, so you can see those two masses there that represent our zoning. And you can see the assumptions that we put in terms of target FSRs or FARs, softscape, hardscape, etc. Now I'm going to do something as well. I'm going to call this scenario 2. Scenario 2. High density. And I'm going to copy these, and I'm just going to paste them onto scenario 2. And then in scenario 2, I'm going to shrink that back, and I'm going to grow that. Okay, so scenario 2 and scenario 1. Scenario 1, we keep Arcturus close. We keep the parcels near there, low density, and then high density in scenario 2. And with that, we are ready to do some analytics. So I add the app to the project. Let me just shrink this ever so slightly. And once we've got the app added to the project, and you'll have this done automatically, we add a category. So everything that we see in the analytics pane has a category and a color, and I'm going to make it sort of a nice green. Create category. Urban form analysis with its green, empty, no measures inside of it. So let's add some measures. So the way things work in Giraffe Analytics is you have measures, which are line items. You have categories, which are just headings, basically. Usages, now these are the usages that we just created. So if I look for R1 over there, you'll see there's the canopy cover, the building, hardscape, softscape. And if we scroll down, we can actually see that R3, that high density, and the softscape falls down from 0.35 to 0.15, etc. So we have our assumptions table, and we record those in usages, and we have our units as well, and then most of our time is spent on measures. So let's create a new measure. I'll just select the urban form analysis. I'll create a new measure. I'm just going to call this, total residential area, total gross residential area, and it's going to be in square meters. And now we need to set up the formula. So the way that formulas work in analytics is that there's a formula, a plus b times that, and it's looking for components. And the components can be properties, line items, subtotals, or site areas. So this is the site area, softscape area, etc. Property is very flexible. What it looks for is things like areas, which are geometric features or geometric properties. Now, I don't set the gross area, it's a property of the shapes that I've drawn. But gross area can also look for properties which are in the usages panel, which are defined in the usages panel. So the floor area ratio target is a property that I've set. So I'm calling out those two different types of properties, and then the formula I'm going to do is just A star B, and I'm going to sum up. So this formula is applied to every feature, and there's 4 features, and it goes, what's the area of that feature, what's the floor ratio target of that feature, and then it does that 4 times and adds them all up. We save those changes. Giraffe tells you what you've just done, and we've got our first measure in urban form analysis in meters, right? And let's just set that. We could say meters squared is a bit better in square meters because area is in square meters. So that's total gross residential area. Now let's add another measure, and this is just going to be a constant. I'm going to say this is average dwelling size, and this is going to be also in square meters, and I don't need a component. This is going to be a constant. So I'm just going to say that this is 100 square meters, and it's a constant, and I save changes. Done. Okay, and now I'm going to add another one, which is total dwellings. And I am going to put this in, I'm going to create a new unit called dwellings, because we're measuring dwellings, and I'm going to create a formula, but I'm not going to reach into the model and look for properties. I'm just going to get a line item, which is my total gross residential area. And then I'm going to look for another line item, which is my average dwelling size, which is 100 square meters. And then the equation is A divided A. And let's say we multiply that by 0.8 to factor it down to a net resident. So 20% of that area will be corridors, etc. And then we divide it by the B, which is the average dwelling size. And I'm just going to put that in, I'm going to wrap that in an int. So it's an integer. And happy days. And then in the additional details say note 20% non-dwelling space, that's corridors, etc. Save changes. Cool. All right, so we're really starting to get there. So now we have total gross residential area, and we have average dwelling size, and we have total dwellings. And now we're not splitting currently in scenarios. So let me set that up so that we do split by layer, and we're going to see those 2 layers actually split out. So now we see default and scenario 2 high density. In the default scenario, 5,144 square meters if these are fully built out, and in the scenario 2 high density, 6,437, which makes sense because we've got more R3 in scenario 2 high density, which is cool. Okay, and then the dwelling size is the same, so we get more total dwellings in scenario 2. All right, so happy days. Okay, so let's add something else in a measure. Let's add, we'll put this in urban form analysis, and we'll say total softscape. And this will be in square meters as well, and we will go for gross area to work this out from first principles, and then I think it's coverage softscape, right? And we're just going to go A/B. So take the gross area for every feature and multiply it by the percentage of it that is softscape, boom, and then add it up. So we get 846 square meters of softscape. Okay, so we now have got ourselves a little built form report. I think it's time to build another category. So let's do an economic impact. create, and let's make economic impact something different. Save changes and go to economic impact and start creating some new measures. So let's say persons per dwelling, and it'll be in persons, or I could say population or something like that. Oops, I forgot to create it. Persons, and this is a constant, persons per dwelling. This is an assumption, so I'm going to say it's 2.1. 2 people, and then 10% of one person for every single dwelling. And then we can say total population, and that is going to be in persons, and that is going to be a line item, which is person per dwelling, and then we're going to look for total dwellings. And so you can see when I've got this line item, I can reach back into the urban form analysis category and just bring line items from there. And if we're looking for subtotals, these are the subtotals of dwellings, square meters, and these are the subtotals of every unit in every category. So anyway, total dwellings is what we wanted, and then it's simply A star B, so the number of dwellings times the persons per dwelling. We save changes, and we get to going, which is pretty cool. Okay, so now we've got the 2.1 persons per dwelling, and our total population is 86.1. So we've got 41 total dwellings, times 2.1 is about 86.1 people. So we're not even dealing in whole people. So we've got ourselves a total population, and I'm going to add a tax take per dwelling. So put that in economic impact, and it's a tax generated per dwelling. And you can see here in Giraffe that I'm using this tool often not as an analytics tool, but as a communications tool. So this is, let's say, $1,000 a quarter times 4 quarters, $4,000, 1K per quarter per dwelling. And it's constant, it save changes, done. Right, and then we can say, let's just get into economics, we can say total tax take, total tax generated. Yeah. And put that in the dollars, the almighty buck, and it is a line item. We go over total dwellings, and then tax generated per dwelling, and it's A star B. So save changes. Okay, so we've got this now. So hang on, person per dwelling, total population, tax per dwelling, total tax. It's pretty cool, right? So I'm going, and then let's say there's one more that I want to add, which will be in economic impact. Let's say it is total local spend. Total local spend per person, and let's say this is again dollars, and it's going to be, say, 2,000. So changes, and then a new measure, which is total spend generated, again in dollars, and we're going to go our total population, 193 persons, and the total spend per person, and it's A star B. And then we save those changes. Cool. 2,000 total spend, and just notice that at every point in this process, you can always just hover above a cell and just see where it's coming from, what the formula is, where the number's coming from, and why it is the way it is. So you can see this is looking really good. I can collapse these and I can reorder them. You can do all those nice things just to make sure that my story flows really well. And it may not, in this instance, make sense to actually talk about these areas. These areas here refer to the footprint, which doesn't really make sense for us. So let's just turn them off. And happy days. There we are. All right. So very, very quickly, what we've done is we have created 2 scenarios, and we've analyzed them in terms of local spend, in terms of urban form analysis, total softscape, a whole bunch of things, which is really cool. And of course, these don't have to be this small. You can, we could be zoning large swathes of the countryside, and as long as the areas that we're talking about are approximately accurate, some really nice figures will be generated. at this level of detail, obviously, full accuracy would be lovely, but is absolutely not necessary. What a zoning control that says, like we have, that it's 35% softscape. I mean, is it going to be 36, 33, 31 when people actually deliver it? Hard to tell. So we want to get all rough orders of magnitude without getting caught in the detail. So let me make that. So we're currently in the high density scenario. So let's make that our 1. And that'll change all the figures there. And I'm just going to copy it down into the default scenario as well. And in the high density scenario, let's make it high density, R3. Boom. Okay, so now you can start to see, upzoning. The population jumps, therefore the total spend jumps without any additional spend per person. And you can see here where it starts getting really flexible is now we can just create an R4, ultra density, make that 4, a target FSR of 4 on a max height of 24, maybe even 36. I'm going to change this height to 36 as well, so they render rightly, and let's make this sort of a shockingly abrasive color. Maybe we leave the softscape, so maybe here we're actually going for towers, right? And softscape stays as high as it is here, so the building coverage stays as low as it is. And in the high density scenario, I can create this as R4, and everything updates, right? Because all the formulas don't depend on the name or anything. They're all reading from these parameters, which are common to R3, R2, R1, and R4. So as long as we keep our usages, as long as we give the right parameters that these formulas require to every usage that we're analyzing, we can just create as many as we want. And so hopefully you see how powerful this is and how easy it is to use. And so you can imagine going through economic impact, demographic impact, education requirement, power generation required, a whole bunch of reporting here where it's presented in a very clean and very easy to understand way. And if people ask you to justify your assumptions or show you're working, it's done. And I guess the really cool thing is if we wanted to start another project, we simply take these usages and we go, let's create a new, let's say we're going to rezone this area here. So we just draw the area we're going to rezone, save as a project, new rezoning. And I'm just going to paste those in just so we bring the usages in, and I'll delete them now. I'll bring in the analytics app. And what I'm going to do is I'm now just going to import all the formulas from my zoning template. Boom. See what I've got here, total gross, all of the things that we needed. And I'm going to select all and I'm going to import those. And we've got them. They're not showing anything because no rezoning has yet taken place. And then let's do it. So I'm going to put some high density next to this park, the Ultra 4 R4. I'm going to put it just to the, maybe I'll draw it back a bit from the park so that we don't overshadow it. Not that this height will be fully built out, but there will be those things generated. And then I'll put some R3 next to the park and stretch it up. You can see how freaking awesome this is. And as I'm working, I can see what I'm doing. And now I ask you to imagine how your staff may be, your analytics department may be controlling these build form analysis and these equations and setting them up in the zoning template, and your urban planning or your different function within the business or within the department can be actually doing the planning and the drawing like this. And now, of course, these equations here are dependent on these areas. That 35,481 is going into this equation over here. You can actually see it there at the bottom. A second from the bottom, 35,481. So these need to be roughly accurate. But as time goes on, you can make them more accurate as this project evolves. This is giving you a pretty good gut sense of where you are and what's happening. So yeah, that new rezoning is now done and created, and that report appears automatically. Now we do allow you to override so you'd have to turn those areas off again to get it exactly the same. But once you've done that, you've inherited all the right assumptions via the usages and all the right equations and formula via the analytics tab.